My head. It's the Outdated Entertainment Hour. Hello, everybody. This is Bob Smith, and welcome back to the Outdated Entertainment Hour. We are so glad you are back today because Joe Puccio, our special guest, and myself are a couple of old-time rock and rollers, and we're going to talk about old-time rock and roll, but this time we're talking about the rock and roll replacements. These are the musicians that replaced other famous musicians and famous acts, from singers to drummers to bass players to catering. Well, maybe not the last one, but they're all here, many of them anyway, and we hope you enjoyed the list we came up with of notable step-ins, as it were. Joe is a great journalist who works for the Generation X Wire website, a site you really need to check out for your offbeat entertainment news. And speaking of offbeat, here's Joe Walsh. He's the Eagles guitarist, and he was a replacement himself. Funny how these things work out, isn't it? Anyway, hang on. We got a fun show for you. Here's Joe, followed by us. We will be right back.
Hi, everybody. This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. Ham radio operators are everywhere, in your city, your area, your neighborhood, in any country you go to. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. In case of natural or man-made disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, you name it, we're there. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/whatishamradio. See you on the air.
Joe, he was better. My guy was better.
My guitar player is way better than your guitar player, Bob.
Well, that's the show. Get out of here. No, I'm just kidding, everybody. Hi. We have, again, a real music lover, a journalist from Generation X Wire. We love having him on the show. We're going to talk a little rock and roll. It's Joe Puccio. Joe, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thanks for having me back. I always have a great time doing this podcast, and I think this topic is a really good one. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it.
This is going to be a good show. It's called the Rock and Roll Replacements. What that means is we're going back in time all the way to the 70s to look at bands who were successful, but at one point somebody quit, somebody left, something happened, and they replaced a famous player with another famous player. So did it work out? Did it not work out? We've one amazing story about two guitarists who ended up in three major bands, which is unbelievable. We've got probably the most successful replacements of all time in terms of commercial success. And we have a bunch that didn't really pan out. Joe, I know you had a lot of fun putting your list together. I know I did.
I did. As we talked a little bit about before we started recording, but I thought about it today. I came up with a good number of people that I think were pretty successful in the band replacements in their slots. But then I came up with quite a few that, in my opinion, of course, in my humble opinion, were not as successful, or at least were not as effective in my eyes. And I even have a couple that I feel are too close to call that I that I want to say are replacements that are pretty much even. That it's hard for me to kind of to vote one way or the other. But yeah, there's more than you think when you really start to think about it. You can really start going down this rabbit hole of bands and replacements in music.
Here's one that just popped into my head that it was on neither of the lists we talked about. When at one point Joe Perry left Aerosmith and they brought in new players and they made an album called Aerosmith. And everybody went boo, and nobody bought the album, but there was a record without Joe Perry on it, and people forget that. I forget what it was called because I never bought it, but it was that weird period where they weren't getting along, and they actually broke up, and they made an album without Joe Perry, which still freaks me out to this day. Couldn't they have waited, because Joe Perry eventually came back, but I forgot all about that one.
Now, now you're talking my language. I make no, I never shy away from the fact that Aerosmith is my all-time favorite band.
I didn't know that.
Well, now you know.
You mean to tell me I brought that up, but I didn't know that. That's amazing.
That's why I'm really surprised that you brought that up. But Aerosmith will always be my favorite band. I've seen them more times live than any other band.
Do you remember the players? Do you remember the replacements?
Yeah. So the album you're talking about was "Rockin' a Hard Place."
It was "Rockin' a Hard Place." Okay, all right.
And that was, I believe it was 1982.
Okay.
That happened. That was kind of a down period for that band. If you remember, it wasn't just Perry. Brad Whitford had left the band as well.
Right.
So, and then Perry and Whitford both formed their own bands. So they had the Joe Perry Project and Whitford St. Holmes. Brad Whitford formed his own band as well.
Right.
But it is, it's funny because that Rockin' a Hard Place record was not the most successful album for those guys. Perry leaving had something to do with it. Perry, Tyler, they're a tandem. To have Aerosmith, you had to have those two. To me, they're as pivotal a songwriting duo as Jagger Richards, honestly.
I know you're right about 82 because in 1982 at the Glens Falls Civic Center, I saw ZZ Top and who opened with the Joe Perry Project. So it was like he had left and I got to see Joe Perry without Aerosmith. It's fine. It was fine. But it didn't have the edge of Aerosmith. It was different.
Right.
It's a little more mellow, I thought. I thought his stuff was a little more mellow than Aerosmith. But things happen. People argue. You should have heard the argument Joe and I had about 10 minutes ago. So you never know. No, I'm kidding. I'm a kid. I kid. But hey, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're just going to look back at guys who were and women who replaced other fine musicians and bands I know you all loved out there. So if you're a rock and roll fan, this is the show for you. This may jog your memory and maybe even teach you a thing or two about, people who ran in and out of bands for a while.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really hard to believe just how many successful bands through the years have had replacements. And there's so many that I think people don't even realize the members weren't the originals. Bands that, everybody just assumes that, that was their first album or this was the lineup. There's a big difference between the classic lineup of bands and the original lineup because many times they're not the same.
That's right. Sometimes a band takes a while to take off. I can think of Bob Seger made a bunch of albums before he got popular for Capitol Records. They stuck with him and he eventually hit, but it took a long time. Like it was maybe 5 albums or something like that. Bonnie Raitt's another one. People knew who Bonnie Raitt was, but she didn't take off till she signed with, I guess it was Capitol in the 80s. So you never know. There's late bloomers out there. It's like, that's what makes this stuff so much fun. You look back with fondness and gratitude at all the cool sounds we used to hear. So
Very
who
true.
starts? Do you want me to start? You want to start? What do you want to do?
Yeah, why don't you start? That's fine.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story, rock and rollers. This is about 2 guys who ended up collectively in 3 of the major bands of the 70s, but they're connected, these 2 guitarists, because they both played in the first band. As everybody knows, around, I guess it was 70 or 71, Joe Walsh wanted to spread his musical wings, and he left the James Gang. They had some FM hits with Funk 49 and stuff like that, but they really didn't break through, although they sold some albums. So he leaves the James Gang, and they're from Cleveland, and Dale Peters and Jim Fox, who were members of the James Gang, go to see a jam in Cleveland that happened to contain a Canadian guitarist named Dominic Turano and Eric Clapton. They see this guy Triano and they go, man, this guy can go. So they hire him and a friend of his named Roy Kenner to become the new members of the James Gang. And they recorded 2 albums called Straight Shooter and Passing Through. And you know how it is when you replace a major star in a band. I mean, the James Gang was Joe Walsh. I mean, come on. I mean, I like the other 2 guys too, but Joe Walsh was the creative force, the driving factor, and he was their sound. And suddenly the James Gang put out Straight Shooter, which was funkier and different, and a different lead vocalist. It didn't sound like the same band, mainly because it wasn't the same band. And, you know, a lot of times people just want to know from it. They don't care. And that's basically what happens in the James Gang. So Dominic leaves after 2 unsuccessful, semi-unsuccessful albums to be replaced by a young guy in his 20s named Tommy Bolin, who had worked with Zephyr. He worked with Billy Cobham, a tremendous player. I mean, he could play progressive, he could play rock, he could play funk, he could sing well, wrote decent songs. I like Tommy Bolin a lot. He replaces Dominic Triano, the James Gang, and does the same thing Dominic Triano does. In other words, he makes the 2 records. The first one has a minor hit on it. Second one doesn't do as well, and he leaves the band again. But Tommy Bolin really made his mark. How much did he make his mark? He replaced Ritchie Blackmore in Deep Purple for the criminally underrated 1975 album Come Taste the Band. And Joe hasn't heard it here. He told me he didn't hear it. This is a really, really good record because it's still got Ian Pace on drums, John Lord on keyboards, the 2-headed singers of Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale. It's a spectacular record. I am telling you, it's not good. It's great. It's a fine record. I mean, some memorable songs on there. They rock like crazy. They get a little funky. It really worked, but nobody wanted to hear it because there was no Ritchie Blackmore in the band at that point. So it's bad timing on everybody's part. Meanwhile, Dominic Triano gets a phone call and joins the Guess Who replacing Randy Bachman. There were 3 lead guitar players in the Guess Who. It was Randy Bachman, Kurt Winter for a few albums, and then Winter was replaced by Dominic Triano. They made 2 records, and again, he leaves that band. So were they a success? I think they were, only because the records were really good. There's an album called Flavors by the Guess Who, it's a little progressive, a little hard rock, some ballads. That's what it is. It's flavors. It's different musical flavors. And Come Taste the Band is the great unknown classic of the 70s. So I think from an artistic standpoint, yeah, they did good work. From a public standpoint, nobody wanted to know from them because they weren't the original guys.
Absolutely. You make a good point. Like you said, I mean, people were not as quick to really accept the James Gang, I guess, without him. I mean, Joe Walsh is a freaking legend. I mean, that guy is a rock star. He's actually my all-time favorite Eagle. And I know that most people would probably, go for a couple of the other guys, but if I had to pick my favorite Eagles, I mean, it's hands down. It's always been Joe Walsh ever since he joined that band. It really is.
Joe Walsh has been on every edition of the show.
I know he has, and that did not sway my vote here. But
no, of course not. No.
Yeah, I've always been a huge fan of Joe.
Me too. You know something? He has a way with melody that most guitar players don't have. He can be very melodic. He can rock out. Writes really good songs. I mean, he made an album called Ordinary Average Guy, which is a solo record, which I think is a fabulous record, including an ending song called School Days that chokes me up. It was my childhood they sang about, and it was just great. So I don't know what to say other than Joe Walsh. I'm glad he's still around and still kicking and still playing because he looks the same. Have you seen him?
I have, yeah.
He hasn't aged a day. I'd like to know his secret because he looks great.
Great segue because you mentioned, the James Gang and Joe Walsh, and Joe was on my list as well, but in a little bit of a different vein. That I was gonna bring up the fact that he replaced Bernie Leadon in the Eagles, as we just talked about, which I think was obviously a great move for the Eagles. Leadon may not be a household name for a lot of listeners, but I mean, he actually co-wrote a lot of the Eagles hits. I want to say, at least 10 or 12 of their hits, he had a hand in. And I believe one of them was Witchy Woman. I don't know. Like we've already talked about. I mean, Walsh is just endearing. He has great humor about him. He has a very unique voice. He doesn't have your typical great rock star voice, but it's so iconic and it's so recognizable. And I've always just loved him and Don Felder with the guitar going back and forth on the guitar on Hotel California, Life in the Fast Lane, things like that. And I'll just say that when I love Life's Been Good, the big Joe Walsh Solo hit. I mean, how could you not love that song? It's so funny. It's so, the satire is so great. I think he like references Keith Moon in that song, talking about living in hotels, tearing out the walls, making the accountants pay for it, whatever the lyrics are. I'm paraphrasing there, and a few other people, I'm sure that he kind of talks about in that song. But yeah, Walsh is just. And what else can you say about him?
He's awesome. He's just great. And here's something about the Eagles. A couple of things. They've had so many members. Don Felder was an original member. He's joined in '74, but I don't think he replaced anybody. I just think he joined. I don't recall him stepping in for anybody. He's underrated. He's really good. He's a great guitar player. He really great performer too. He always looked like he was enjoying himself so well.
Yeah.
He had that look to him. And the bass player Randy Meisner, who sung "Take It to the Limit," got replaced by Timothy B. Schmidt, a former member of Poco. In fact, the Eagles had two former Poco bass players in the band, because Randy Meisner started with Poco, left Poco, and then joined the Eagles, and so did Timothy B. Schmidt. That's why I don't want to say this too flippantly, but Russ Young, the leader of Poco, hated Don Henley the whole rest of his life because he kept stealing his bass players. So I don't know what to say other than that's just the way it worked. And speaking of Poco, Jim Messina was an original founding member of Poco. He got replaced by a guy named Paul Cotton in 1970. And if you remember Heart of the Night, that was Paul Cotton, and that was around '79. He brought a rock edge to Poco that they really needed. They were a country rock band, and really the first one when they started around '68, '69. And I'll tell you what, I just think that if you've ever heard Paul Cotton sing on those later Poco albums, he wrote about romance from a male perspective. To me, he's the greatest writer like that. Nobody's ever heard these songs. But if you were a Poco fan, he could write a song about like a breakup or missing somebody and rip your guts out. He really had that gift. And as a guitarist, he was real good. He didn't sound like anybody else. He had his own guitar style. So Poco, the Eagles, there's a big association between the two. And I liked every one of the musicians we just talked about, every one of them.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm telling you, you gotta have a notebook to keep track of this. It's all these like interchanging of musicians and going to different bands. It's really hard to keep track of. I'm telling you, it's a talent to really to really keep this stuff in your head.
Here's a funny one, Rush. You had a guy and I had a guy. So do your guy and I'll do my guy. Go ahead.
So for Rush, I'm gonna go with Neil Peart, who replaced John Rutsey, which again is not a very well-known name in the band, but he was originally in the band before Neil. I think it speaks for itself that Neil is one of the greatest drummers of all time. I think we could all kind of agree on that. Rush, it's funny. Rush is sort of a band that I actually know a lot of people that never got into them. You had to kind of be into that sort of progressive rock at that time. Their heyday was a little bit before my time, but I got into them when I started getting into classic rock when I was growing up. But I think obviously that was a great addition for Rush. He joined in 1974. Rutsey actually co-founded the band with Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson. Well, but maybe not.
Yeah, that is not. That is not correct. That is not correct.
Bob's gonna correct me here. Yeah.
I'll bet a lot of people don't know this. Geddy Lee was not the original singer and bassist in Rush. It was a fellow named Jeff Jones, who I believe was in the band when they first started, and great singer, awesome bass player, tremendous player, and he's still working.
Oh, wow.
Jeff Jones is a member of the Burton Cummings band. It's going to play the United States this coming month and throughout the first part of this year. Cummings is 77 now. He's still from the Guess Who. He's still out there rocking. Yeah. So believe it or not, Geddy Lee was not the founding bassist and singer in Rush. Jeff Jones was.
You see, you basically just corrected me. I do not remember that. I do not ever remember reading that. So I want to look that up because I had no idea about that either.
You will see that I was correct, and you'll be in awe of me for the rest of your life. What do you think of
that? I accept it.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to say this. We were talking before we hit the record button. We're here to have some fun. But every time I do like a list show or a look back show, you get the Facebook messages saying you forgot. You think I'm this guy? No, please don't bother. Okay, our lists are never meant to be comprehensive. They're just meant to be fun. All right, we're gonna leave out 1,000 people who replace people in other bands. I know that. It's fine. I'm glad that you know somebody that I didn't put on the show. That's fine, but don't correct me. We're just here to have some fun, guys. I get these all the time, especially on the wrestling show, Joe. It's like you forgot Tito Santana. God,
I'm
here it
not
is. Here it
surprised.
is, guys. I enjoy a full and varied life, and I'm also older than most kinds of cereal brands. So it's like I can't remember everything. So, but this is the stuff that Joe and I enjoy, and this is the stuff that we know, and we're going to bring it to you in a fun, warm. We're just here to look back with fondness. That's what both of my podcasts are about. We look back with fondness at stuff we like. That's it, right, Joe?
Definitely, definitely, and I mean, going even further with that, if obviously, as you always mention on your pods, I mean, if anybody has any names that we didn't mention, I'm sure you'd welcome people,
Oh
writing in and
yeah,
let and just say, hey,
absolutely.
we're at this one, and yeah.
No, I love it. I try to answer every letter I get and every Facebook message I get, but just don't use the words "you forgot,"
Mhm.
because this isn't meant to be comprehensive. I mean, you could, what you mentioned before. What was it, Pete Best, right?
Yes, yes,
Now, I don't consider him a replacement because he wasn't part of the Beatles. By the way, Ringo replaced Pete Best, right? Yes, he was a Beatle, but I don't know if I kind of cotton to that concept because nobody ever heard Pete Best, right? I mean,
yeah.
most Beatles fans never heard him play.
Yeah, yeah, I sort of agree with you in the sense that, right. I mean, at the time and when the Beatles were at the height of their fame, right, nobody heard them play, nobody really knew anything about them. But I think I would mention him in the sense that because the Beatles have obviously become what arguably the greatest rock band ever. I mean, there's a lot of different opinions there, but they're in that category. Obviously, he's become a name because people just want to know about the history and they want to know about who was in the band and how did this happen and how did this how did they form. So I mean, everybody kind of knows Pete Best. They just know him by name, even though they're not
Right.
familiar with his playing. And I think in that sense, I mean, again, it was a great replacement in the sense that Ringo's style was a great fit for the Beatles. The way I always understood it was that there was a secret meeting between Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison, without Best knowing about that. They felt that he just wasn't up to snuff. He wasn't up to par for the band, and they decided Ringo was the guy that was going to do it. And think about Ringo. I mean, not just the drumming, but he sang lead vocals with the group, usually like one song on each album. Yellow Submarine, with a little help from my friends. I mean, there's some classic Beatles songs that have Ringo written all over it. He also, I believe, co-wrote a few of their songs. And I think he's become the iconic member, but I think people still just know Pete Best just because they're the Beatles, and everybody just wants to know about them. They're the classic band.
They're not the greatest rock and roll band of all time. Like, come on, Bo
Well,
Donaldson and the Haywoods. I mean, come on.
I mean, I
Please.
thought we already decided it was
No.
the story.
I laugh every time I think of the words Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods. It's just, I miss the days when you turned it on, you would hear Zeppelin and then you'd hear Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods, or you'd hear it's the Eagles and then you'd hear Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds. I miss the mishmash of you'd hear Aretha Franklin and then you'd hear Mott the Hoople. I
Yeah,
miss mishmash FM or mishmash AM. I grew up on that stuff with a pocket radio, and those are some of my best memories. Is just getting into music for the first time.
this is a tiny bit off topic, but I just want to ask you, since we just talked about the greatest rock and roll band of all time, Stones
Mm-hmm.
versus the Beatles, who would you take?
Draw. Something. I'm a firm believer in. There is no best. As a personal to my ear, I would prefer the Stones. Are grittier.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd like the Stones sound better, and they've had that signature sound for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, even their new records sound kind of like their old records, and they have a definite sound, probably pretty much thanks to Keith Richards. Really, I mean nobody plays rhythm guitar like he does.
No, you're right. You're right.
And I think that's the signature. That's the tie. There could be other players with Mick Jagger, but if he doesn't have Keith Richards behind him, it's going to sound totally different.
Right.
And I think Keith Richards is actually underrated. I think he's one of the greats of all time.
He is underrated. Yeah, he doesn't get mentioned as much as you would think as far as rhythm guitarists go. But I bring up the Stones because they're also one of my all-time favorite bands. And might as well, since we're talking about Beatles Stones, I would go with Mick Taylor, who replaced Brian Jones. And then I guess going even a little further, Ron Wood, who replaced Mick Taylor.
Right.
I thought they were all great. They were all good players in their own right. I think people love Brian Jones for nostalgia, that he was, in the original band and he was on some of those early records. But as far as guitar playing, I think Taylor was technically a lot better. If you look at the guitar playing, I think Taylor and definitely Wood were better players than Jones. I think as the story goes, Jagger felt that Brian Jones wasn't really doing his part at the time. I think that's why they were also looking to sort of, go in a different direction. And then you look at Ronnie Wood. I mean, Ron Wood is so much charisma doing Faces and then in the Stones. And he, I think, was even an improvement over Taylor. So I feel like with every time that they replaced him, I thought Taylor was an improvement in a way for Jones. And I think Ron Wood was the perfect fit. I think he was an improvement over Taylor.
Interesting. Did you read the news that Rod Stewart and Ron Wood are going to do a Faces thing again?
I did not.
Yeah, I read that a couple of months ago. I don't know if they're going to revive it or just kind of look back at it, but they're going to do something about the Faces, and it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Yeah,
I would like to see that. Yeah, I.
Oh, geez, please, Rod, rock a little bit, will you? You've been singing like freaking Frank Sinatra covers. Will you come back to us, Rod? Please, you made your money.
They just announced, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, that Rod Stewart was going to be doing a Yankee Stadium show with Billy Joel this summer.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though. I saw a double bill of Santana and Rod Stewart. It makes no sense, right? So Santana comes out, does the usual gritty, wonderful show. Carlos still puts on a great show. And then they changed this was at Jones Beach Amphitheater. They put this elaborate, white, fancy staging on it, just unbelievably spectacular looking staging. And Rod Stewart comes out and puts on a Vegas Schmaltz review. It was not my cup of tea. He doesn't rock anymore.
He doesn't. He's definitely changed his image very, and I
best part of the show is when he kicks soccer balls into the stands.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason why I know that that's true, that he's definitely changed his image, is my parents will still listen to Rod Stewart, which that is not in their wheelhouse, but they will put on his CDs of his like standards from 10, 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
They don't know anything about his 70s work. They like, oh, we like Rod Stewart. And meanwhile, it's going to be him doing whatever it is, the songs of Frank Sinatra, which, it's fine.
I remember they made a commercial for that album, right? They made a commercial.
Yeah.
And here's Rod singing "It Had to Be You" in front of a bunch of couples. I'm like, oh, come back to us, dude, please. Oh, that's disappointing to me. I don't know. But I will say he always looks the same, Rod Stewart.
He does. He looks great.
He's got the fountain of youth. He always looks at the same hair, same frizzy hair. It's all right. Let's. I'm going to do one quickie and then talk to me about AC/DC after this, okay? But I'm going to talk about Warren Haynes replaced Dickie Betts, and that was a major success. Everybody loved Warren Haynes. Everybody loved Dickie Betts. They were still the Allmans. But I think Warren Haynes brought the jam band sensibility to the Allmans that they never really had before that. Because if you really thought about early Allman Brothers, they're almost jazz-like in their precision and the way their chord patterns went. When Warren Haynes came in, more improv, more longer solos, little Grateful Dead-ish feel to it. So the Allmans definitely changed, but they were every bit as successful with Warren Haynes as they were with Dickie Betts.
That's interesting. So when you say like their early sound was a little bit jazzier, are you talking in the albums that they put out? You feel were a little bit more?
Well, the instrumental on the very first record has a real jazz feel to it.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the song, though. Unfortunately, I'm old. But if anybody out there who has the first Almonds record, it was started with an instrumental
Okay.
that goes into "It's Not My Cross to Bear," right?
Right.
They were really, for Southern guys, they were really sophisticated players, and it goes for Greg too. I mean, as a unit, J-Mo, the whole bunch of them, Mr. Trucks, these were some serious players. I mean, and they like to show off, especially live. I saw every version of the Almonds. In my lifetime, I think I saw Crosby, Stills, and Nash the most. Believe it or not, I'm a huge Stephen Stills fan. And I saw the Almonds almost as much. I may have seen the Almonds 20 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I saw the Almonds a lot. I probably saw Crosby, Stills, and Nash every time they played. Boy, do I miss the Almonds. I really miss the Almonds. There was nobody like them. I mean, they describing them as like grabbing for smoke. No matter how you describe it, it's not right. You know, you can't quite grasp it.
Right.
They were a little jazz, a little funk, a little southern, a little straight ahead rock and roll, some ballads, some instrumentals. I mean, how many rock bands did instrumentals in the mid 70s?
That's true.
Other
Yeah.
bands copied the Allman Brothers in doing that. So, in any event, I just thought that Warren Haynes is a fine player, really good songwriter. He's still working to this day. A nice lateral move for the Almonds, who I miss greatly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, it's kind of hard to categorize them.
Yeah.
And I love, and I love bands like that. I love musicians like that, where they're not just strictly one specific genre. They don't just do metal. They don't just do hard rock, where they have a little of everything, and I think that's absolutely the definition of the Allman Brothers.
But here's another thing about the Almonds too, or the Southern rock. No, they weren't. I don't think they even liked being called Southern rock. They were just
Yeah.
called themselves a rock and roll band, So
Yeah.
I don't know. So anyway, you were mentioning something about AC/DC. What you got for me?
So AC/DC is one that obviously everybody knows about. The big lead singer change there. Brian Johnson replaced Bon Scott after Bon Scott's death. I would say, I know both singers have their fans, have their supporters. This is kind of the easy way out, but they're one of only two in my list, two bands in my list that I would say is even. I can't really go one way or the other. Which was it? Was it a good? Was it a beneficial replacement? Now, obviously, in a case like this, there was no choice in that you had a death of a member, and there was nothing. There was no choice. It wasn't like the guy got fired or something. But I would say they were both great vocalists, both different vocalists. Everybody talks about the battle between which is the better album, Highway to Hell in 1979 with Bon Scott, or the comeback album 1980, Back in Black. My 2 cents is that Highway is a great record, but it's a no-brainer. I think Back in Black is the better album, which was the Bon Scott album. But I really think you can't go wrong picking either one of those gentlemen. They were both fantastic. They just both had pipes like you wouldn't imagine. And I mean, Brian Johnson is still going strong today. I mean, he had some vocal issues, I think, a few years ago, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they just announced a tour for this year, and there's talk about adding more dates. So, I mean, hopefully he stays healthy, but he's still got pipes like you wouldn't believe. And I mean, how could you bet against either one of those individuals? Did you have a preference for one or the other?
I'm not a fan.
Not a fan of AC/DC at all?
No.
Wow. Okay.
No, I got nothing against them. It just
not your genre, really. Yeah.
How do I put it? I'd listened to them, and I had one of their albums. They didn't hook me. I don't know why, but that's okay. We all have our take. I listened to Dave Mason a lot during the part where they were. I had funny taste even as a kid. One of my favorites was Dave Mason, his solo albums, and people go, "What? Who? Where?" It used to be with Traffic, guys. Anyway, but no, seriously, we all have our likes. I admit I have oddball taste. If you mention like the top 10 bands of all time, 7 of my 10 will be people that you would go, what? Who? It's just me. It's just me. Now, I listen to everything, and I'm not putting anybody down. I don't believe in that. There may be styles I don't like, some artists I'm not fond of, but it doesn't make me angry. You know how some people go, how can you say this about? No, it's just everybody has their favorites, and AC/DC just didn't grab me. I thought they were And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I thought they were greasy kid stuff. You know, it was like as I was older when they were breaking, right? And to me, it sounded like something that my nephew would like, but not me because I had my favorites that were older. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. It makes perfect sense. I mean, look, one thing I'll say about AC/DC is not I'm a fan. I'm not their biggest fan. There's a huge number of bands that I like more than them. But one thing I'll say about AC/DC is that if I would give that band one criticism in a way, and why I have friends that aren't particularly fans either, is the fact that they are in a lot of ways more than any other band a very, very safe one trick type of pony band where their music is all very, very similar. You know, let's put it this way. You're not going to buy the latest AC/DC album and hear a ballad. I mean, their music is very, very similar. You know, they have the same tempo, same type of song. So in that sense, I will definitely, you know, give it to you. And even myself, and I call myself a fan, I choose not to listen. After a while, I do also want to kind of put something else on. I can't listen to AC/DC nonstop for a few hours. You know, after a few hours, I'm like, all right, it's time for somebody else. So in that sense, I can definitely understand, you know, that feeling.
No, it's look, some stuff hooks you, some stuff doesn't.
Yeah.
We're not all shot out of an injection mold. We all have our feelings about stuff, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people who think, oh, I can't think of like there's a guy, big burly guy I know who thinks that Kelly Clarkson is the greatest thing in the world.
Oh, okay.
Right? Right. Okay. No, no. And I'm thinking, why would he? But then, you know what? I'm thinking again, I'm like, everybody has their favorites. There's no, what works for you? What is your muse? That's all that
Right.
counts. That's all that
Right.
counts. Who am I to say what? No, I would never do that to anybody else's musical taste. Life is short. Let the band play. That's all I got
Yeah.
to say. You know?
Absolutely.
All right. Here's the chicken and the egg question. Sammy Hagar, David Lee Roth, Whiteman or suppositories? No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. I kid. I kid. As we all know, Sammy Hagar replaced David Lee Roth, and everybody goes, they were way more successful with David Lee Roth. That's not true. They had 4 consecutive #1 albums
Right.
with Sammy Hagar. It was a different band, though. There's no question. They changed under because Sammy was more of a songwriting force, I think. What do you think?
Yeah. I'm glad, I'm glad you brought this up because just by coincidence, they are the other band in my list in my head that I would call an even as far as singers and was it a good replacement? Was it
Yes.
not a good
Yeah.
replacement? Look, I mean, you have the old school Van Halen fans that will tell you till they lose their voice that David was the best, that you can't beat Diamond Dave, David Lee Roth. You know, how could you go for Sammy? He's schmaltzy, whatever it is. And I love Dave. I mean, I think he's one of the greatest frontmen at that time. But Van Halen, the charisma was unbelievable. However, I don't think anyone would argue the fact that Sammy Hagar is technically a better singer than Dave. Dave doesn't have a great voice. Dave has charisma. He has stage presence, but he's not a great singer. Sammy's a better songwriter. While Dave is the better frontman, probably. I would still lean towards Roth, probably just from a personal standpoint, just for the nostalgia factor, and just because those early Van Halen albums, Van Halen albums were so great. I would not argue with you either way. I think they were both fantastic, and you're absolutely right. Sammy was so successful in that band, and for some reason, people don't like to give him credit for that. They're these Dave supporters that they say, "Oh, how could you go with Sammy? They were so much more successful with Jump and talking about Love and Panama." No, not true. Sammy had so many hits with that band. Why Can't This Be Love? Dreams, Pound Cake, When It's Love. I mean, it just goes on and on. And I'll even go so far as to say one of the most underrated. We were talking about underrated albums earlier. The most underrated Van Halen album was from 1995, Balance. It was an album with Sammy, and it wasn't that successful. It wasn't as successful as the prior two. But I think that's probably my favorite Sammy album. It had some great songs on it. It's definitely worth checking out. And I mean, come on, let's be honest. I mean, how could you go wrong with either of those two?
all rock and roll bands, even the big ones, with the possible exception of the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, every single rock and roll band who was on top of the mountain will eventually put out that record that doesn't do as well. All of them.
Yes.
All of them, from Crosby, Stills, and Nash to AC/DC to who you're talking about now. There comes a time, and then they start pointing fingers and assigning blame. No, it's the passage of time. A new music style takes over, or something, or the sound is different, or it's the disco era, or whatever it may have happened. Every top band fades. It doesn't mean they're not good. It's just that radio has always been fickle.
Exactly.
For a while they were playing swing. You know what I'm saying? It's like you never know what the next trend is going to be. And oh, that old stuff again. You know what I'm saying? That's radio. Radio has a tendency to pigeonhole people, and it can hurt artists with gray hair.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think for fans of these bands, like Van Halen's obviously an example, but there's so many other bands you can mention. I almost feel like it's something that it's a nice secret. It's a nice feeling for the fan of that band when an album maybe doesn't do as well or is not as successful, and you're a fan of this band and you could appreciate it, and at least
Uh-huh.
you can actually listen to these albums and say, you know what, but I know this didn't do as well. I know it didn't have 3 singles on the radio, but check this song out. Check this song out. There's so many good stuff. There's so much good stuff out there from these legendary bands. And because they just don't get played on the radio, because they just
Right.
aren't as successful, nobody knows about it. But I mean,
Right.
it's
Mhm.
so worth checking out because it's just because radio deemed it not a hit. Radio said, well, there's no single on here. That doesn't mean that these albums were not good. And I think that's a good point for Balance. I think that Balance had a couple of good radio hits. Don't get me wrong; it wasn't that much of a flop. It did well,
Mhm.
but I think most people won't talk about that in the greats. They'll talk about the really big records, and I think it's worth seeking out. And I've always felt anyway, personally, that's always a nice aspect of being a fan of a band is if it's an album that didn't do as well, I mean, you're able to sort of sort through that and be able to tell what's good, what's not, and appreciate things that maybe the rest of the radio listening audience didn't hear.
But this is why I don't like corporate radio. It's one of the things that I hardly switch on anymore. Is because I think David Crosby left us a little while ago, and I'll tell you what, his last 4 solo albums were awesome. He sounded the same. His voice sounded the same. He's writing great songs backed by great players. Incredible work, and nobody heard it because nobody heard it on the radio.
Right.
And there's been a lot of veteran artists who continue to make really interesting music, and it just comes and goes, and nobody even knows. That bugs me. I listen. Rock and roll is a youth game. Pop music is meant for youthful people. It's who puts it out and it's who listens to it. But I just wish that once in a great doggone while somebody would note something that's real good, and they'll get great reviews in magazines. But that's the first you'll hear about it. That's the
Yes.
first you'll see it. Thank goodness for things like Rolling Stone. You wouldn't even hear these records otherwise.
Absolutely. I know it's a little off topic, but yeah, I mean, terrestrial radio, that's one of the reasons why classic artists, quote unquote classic artists, can't get their new music played on radio stations because, in New York, since we're in New York, I mean, I'll mention it. The big classic rock stations is Q104.3, and on Long Island, 102.3 BAB, and they'll play classic rock, just nonstop. But are they going to play a new song from a classic? Are they going to play the new, Stones song? I mean, that's a bad example. Stones probably are the one exception. They'll play something from them.
Yeah, they got airplay with "Don't Be Angry with Me," whatever that song's called.
Right, from Hackney Diamonds. But I mean, as far as
Mhm.
like your run of the mill classic rock bands, if they're a band that was famous in the 70s and 80s or whatever, they're not going to play the new single. They're
No,
going to play the old stuff, and it's a shame because there's so much good stuff out there, but they're not going to play it on the classic stations because they feel the fans only want to hear the old stuff, and they're not going to play it on the new rock stations because they feel that these bands are too old.
radio was way better before programming took over in the '80s. There's no question about it. Everybody goes by programmers now. We could explain what that means, but you know what? This is why you hear the same 7 songs in every station you put on.
Exactly.
And that's why nobody listens to the radio anymore. Everybody listens to streaming stations,
Yep.
or they'll listen to Sirius FM, and they'll find what they're looking for. Or, excuse me, Sirius XM, I should say.
Yes.
And you will find your music again. And that's what's making those companies so successful, is the accessibility to stuff that you don't hear everywhere else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank goodness for them, too. I'm telling you. You got another one? You want to do one?
You know what? Yeah, I will. Keeping with this topic of bands that were successful or they've had a lot of commercial success, they sort of lost that. I'm going to give you an example of a band. This is kind of going a little bit of a different direction. Okay, Motley Crue. Motley Crue is obviously big glam rock hair band from the 80s, led by Vince Neil. Everybody knows Tommy Lee in the band, for other endeavors from him. I'll give you an example with them. There was one album in 1994. Vince Neil was fired. They hired a man named John Corabi, who had found some success in another band called The Scream years earlier. Crue put this album out. They went full throttle with the press. Oh, this is the new sound of the Crue. We don't need Vince, John Corabi, and we have a different sound. It's darker. You have to remember, in 1994, music was a lot different than it was in 1984. In the 80s, it was very glammy. It was a lot of makeup and this and that. 94, you had grunge coming in. You had Pearl Jam and you had Soundgarden and Nirvana. So Motley Crue decided to go that route. They hired Corabi and they put out this album that was so dark. And I can tell you that which I'm guessing most of the listeners have never heard this album because it was a total flop. If you listen to this album, you would swear that it was not Motley Crue. But I was, one of the few that bought this album, had tickets to see their concert at the old Roseland Ballroom in New York City, which I don't believe is still around. I could be wrong. It might be. But it was the venue in New York City, had tickets to see them. They canceled it. They canceled the tour a few weeks before because of poor ticket sales. That's how poorly Corabi was received in this band. People just did not want to hear it. The album had no top singles, no hits. But to this day, and yes, I consider myself a pretty big Motley Crue fan, as I like that genre of music. It's probably, if not my favorite, it's at least my second favorite Motley Crue album. It's incredible. The songwriting is incredible. Corabi could sing circles around Vince Neil, such a great vocalist. He's had a lot of success with other bands. But I just think it's another case of a band or an album that nobody gave any chance to, just because they just decided that Motley Crue has to be Vince Neil, Tommy Lee, Nikki Sixx, Mick Mars. But if you've never heard this self-titled album in 94, listen to it. It's called Motley Crue 1994. Great album.
We will call this the Joe Walsh factor. Dominic Tranno and Tommy Bolin were awesome guitar players. Everybody just wanted to hear Joe Walsh. When they found out he wasn't in the band, they ignored it.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing that happened there, just like you described it.
Exactly. Same thing. And it's a shame, but it's, kind of all the things we already talked about. It's just people want what they want. They won't give things a chance. And unfortunately, it just didn't do well. And just as a little side note on that, what happened? The tour was canceled. The album tanked. So what did they do? A couple years later, of course, they rehired Vince, and he's still with the band now.
There you go. I'm going to go back to the 70s again. In 1978, both Grace Slick and Marty Balin jumped off of the Jefferson Starship. They both left. What's Paul Kantner to do? He hired Mickey Thomas, who you may know sang Fooled Around and Fall in Love with Elvin Bishop. Boy, did that work. And I'll tell you what, as great of a vocalist as Mickey Thomas is, I mean, they had a hit right off the bat with Jane. You remember that song, Jane?
Absolutely.
Great singer. He's just a great singer. But I give credit to Kantner, who, was the main arranger of Starship and Airplane. When you listen to that album, he went back to the same techniques that he used on Starship, which was everybody in the band would sing at the same time. And it sounded exactly like Starship. Without the two main singers, it still sounded like Starship. That's a miracle. Nobody said, "Oh, I'm not listening to this." No, they had a hit right off. It still sounded like that band. an amazing, amazing achievement. Uh, Mickey Thomas is just one of my favorite singers. I mean, the Elvin Bishop live "Raising Hell" album. He does a live version of "Fooled Around and Fell in Love" that will just melt the paint off the walls. The way he finishes that song is a singer's textbook. That was a really good replacement. It shouldn't have worked. It worked like gangbusters.
I agree. I'm also a huge Mickey Thomas fan. He actually played a show last year, right around here on Long Island, which I did not get to go to. I tried to go, but I believe it was a free concert at one of the parks over here. But
Right.
great vocals. He's always been a great vocalist, pure, and he still sounds good. If you pull him up on YouTube and you listen to his live performances of the last few years, still sounds great. The guy is what, 75, 76 years old. He's got to be.
Is
Uh,
he really that old?
he's got to
Wow.
be. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're getting old. By the way, let me just get off topic. Judy Collins, James Taylor, Mickey Thomas, a few others. What deal with the devil did they make to sound just as good now? David Crosby, just as good in their later years as they did in their prime. They sound exactly. Judy Collins is a miracle.
Yes.
I saw her with Steven Stills a few years ago. It was like she's still the same singer. I've hit every note, held them. Oh my gosh! As a singer, I know how to fake things. Sometimes when you get older and you can't hit the note you used to hit, you can kind of rise to it or
Yes.
sing it flat. There's techniques to keep the song going, even though you can't quite nail that note the way you used to. These people don't do that. They still sound the same. How do they do it? It's amazing.
I know. I know. There's so many like that, but on the flip side, there's a lot that certainly aren't like that. So
Mhm.
that's why, like you said, I mean, the ones that are able to still hold these notes and still sound so great. Yeah, you wonder how the hell did they do it? I don't know. I mean, I heard I don't know if you've seen footage recently of Frankie Valli
I
doing
did
live
see that
shows,
footage. Yes,
and
yeah.
it's sad. I mean, I saw Frankie Valli about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago at a show, and he was okay. I mean, you could tell there was a lot of background stuff, and obviously he couldn't do what he once could. But if you listen to, or if you watch the footage now on YouTube of stuff from, I'm talking about the last like year or two, it's sad. I mean, this guy looks like a zombie, out there. I don't even think he's singing. I think they just pipe in the vocals and he has his background. So obviously it doesn't apply to everybody, but yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying.
Listen to me. People love their memories. They love your kids' stuff. And I'm sure that the audiences who saw what you just described loved it. I
Right.
once went to a late in their lives Bo Diddley Chuck Berry concert here in Long Island, and it was the most hodgepodgey, thrown together, not tight, not professional show I have ever seen, and the audience went nuts anyway. Why? They heard the songs that they heard when they were 10 and 12 years old. Sometimes that's all you need, and that's how classic music is. I would never besmirch Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry. They put on a lousy show, but you know what? You can't take away those memories, and that's why the people were there. They played the songs that they grew up hearing. Sometimes they don't even have to be played well. Just the fact that they played them is enough alive. You've been to shows like that, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think people, just like you said, people tend to be forgiving
Mhm.
in those type of situations. I mean, if you grew up with this stuff and you want to hear the old stuff, the old hits, and it's nostalgia just takes over. And I mean, that's a great example. I mean, for sure. I mean, people just don't care. They see, if they see the person in front of them, they see the band and they hear the music, they let everything else is out the window.
Well, I mentioned Burton Cummings before. He's 77 and he's going to tour the States. I'm going in March and I'm even bringing some friends over from Pennsylvania to come and see the show with me.
Mm.
Here's why I'm going. I may never see him again. You never
Right.
know.
Right.
You never know. And I love the Guess Who. And it's like, he's got an awesome backing band with Jeff Jones, who we talked about before. I want to get out there and see him. I never know if I ever get a chance to do it again.
Yeah.
I've reached that point with my high school favorites now are kind of fading away one by one. So if some of my favorites are around, I will go out of my way to see them. I'm going out of my way to see that. So just how I feel.
No, I get it. I
That's
get
what
it.
this show is. That's what this show is supposed to be. We're giving thanks to the cool stuff we all enjoyed and made life better.
Definitely. And I'm going to mention one here and I want to get your take on. I'm going to talk about Genesis. I'm going to say now, Phil Collins who replaced Peter Gabriel. Now, obviously, Collins was in the band already. He was already the drummer. So it's not that he actually was a new member in the band, but he was a replacement in the sense that he became the front man. Now, I'll probably get a lot of slack for this because I know Gabriel Genesis has a lot of fans and he has his supporters with, their concept records and all that stuff and the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But I am definitely Team Collins in this case. He gave them a way more radio friendly, accessible sound. I think he had so much more charisma, stage presence. I know Gabriel was sort of like arty and he had that whole progressive rock thing going on with the early Genesis albums, but I'll be honest, I never really got the early albums. I never really was a fan of them. Once Phil came in or he took over as the front man, it actually took a few records before he actually found his footing. It wasn't right away, if you remember. It wasn't until the 80s that they all of a sudden clicked. I think their first big hit with him was Follow You, Follow Me. That might have been a little earlier than the 80s, might have been 78, 79. But then look at the amount of hits that this band had with Phil Collins. Misunderstanding, Turn It On Again, Invisible Touch, That's All, Tonight, Land of Confusion, In Too Deep, Throw It All Away. I mean, he just goes on and on. So I think commercially, you definitely can't argue with that. It was a good move for them. Invisible Touch was their most successful album in like '86. Always been a Phil fan. I actually saw him in concert a few years ago when he did that I think it was supposed to be like a farewell tour. And again, I would say it's probably a case of just being happy to be there, not knowing how much longer if I had another chance to see him, because he was out there like in a wheelchair, I think, or maybe it wasn't a wheelchair, but he was at least sitting down. He couldn't even stand when he was performing the songs, which is a little sad. But it was still just cool. I'm glad I went.
A lot of people sit as they get older. B.B. King used to sit.
Yeah.
I saw Randy Bachman, and to make it look more normal, everybody in the front of the band had stools. Every member of the band, because his back hurts. He's old. Stuff happens. If you can still play, I don't mind him sitting. It's fine.
Right.
It's absolutely fine with me. So, in fact, I kind of like it. It's different. Who else used to sit? A lot of the old singers used to sit. Etta James used to sit. It would be up to the health at the time. As long as you can sing, I don't care if you sit. I don't care if you're laying in bed.
I know.
Let me hear you. I want to hear it.
It's true. I maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I remember the band Sweet, and I saw.
What?
Yeah, they have. That's another story. They have a couple of different versions of the band out. This was about 5 years ago, and the name escapes me right now. The guy that was the singer in that band, he was in pretty bad shape. He was sitting the whole night, but it was a small club, and he made it work. It was great. But what was their big Ballroom Blitz?
Ballroom Blitz,
right?
yeah.
Ballroom Blitz, yeah, and a couple of the other songs. But yeah,
boy, that period of AM radio was something else. Ballroom Blitz, and what was it?
there was another song. Was
Hocus Pocus by Focus.
Okay, yeah.
Right, it is that whole period of that wacky British, whatever the heck that was.
I don't know what you call it.
It was like progressive rock mixed with jokes.
Right.
I can't describe it.
Yeah.
We're going through quite a few people. We talked about this, talked about that. How about back to Deep Purple, who I was a big listen. One of the first record albums I ever had was Machine Head. In fact, oh God, I'm going to get all choked up. It was around 1973 or something like that, and it was Christmas. And my parents bought us both a sound design stereo, my brother and I. It was a little $44 record player with 2 speakers. Loved that thing. And unfortunately, they went to my brother Dennis. What do you guys like in music? They didn't ask me, they asked him. And I ended up with Deep Purple, Machine Head, Grand Funk on Time, their first album, and the first Black Sabbath album. He had something else. I guess they bought 2 by the same band and gave me one of the packages, and he got the other package. So that's where I learned, I discovered Deep Purple, seriously. And I played the grooves off Machine Head, man. That was a great record. So anyway, some time passed, and Ian Gillan leaves, the singer, a great singer, great full-throated vocalist, replaced in the band by David Coverdale and a bass player who could sing named Glenn Hughes. I think both Coverdale and Hughes are amazing singers. When they harmonized, it was scary. There's a song called "You Keep on Moving" on the Come Taste the Band record. Everybody go out and hear that one. I'm telling you, takes the paint off the walls, man. They sang together just great. And solo singing too. There's a song called "This Time Around" that Hughes sings. Whoa, these guys can sing. I mean, sing with capital S. So I think that was a successful replacement. Well, yeah, because they had Burn, which was a hit album, and Stormbringer. I think that was the beginning of the fade, with Coverdale doing most of the lead vocals. So as a Purple fan, I thought I remained loyal. I didn't switch. I kept buying the records every time they came out. So David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes, a couple of awesome singers, man.
That's a good one. Glenn Hughes is an interesting one. He also briefly, I believe, fronted Sabbath, right?
Glenn Hughes?
I believe so. I believe in the mid '80s. I think it might have been like
Oh,
one album.
that's news to me. Sabbath has gone through more singers than I've had hot lunches. So I don't know. I
I'm
don't
almost
know.
Yeah, I'm almost positive he did. But it was very, very brief that he was in that band. But Glenn Hughes is a guy that he still sounds great today.
He does. I saw a
Um,
video. Yeah, it was
I
great.
I did too. And this kind of like coincidentally goes back to he was in a band up until a year or two ago called the Dead Daisies. This band is now fronted by John Corabi, who I just mentioned as the one-time lead singer of Motley Crue. So it's
Oh my
very, as
gosh.
you can see, it's all incest. It's like
Yes, it is.
these
Yeah,
bands
yeah,
just go back and forth. But Glenn Hughes still sounds great. He's another one of those guys where you say, did he make a deal with the devil? Because he
yeah,
sounds good, he looks good, he keeps himself
yeah.
in great shape, and that guy has been in so many different bands.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's everything goes around. As we were putting the show together, we talked about it before I hit the record button, and we didn't even talk about this one,
Yep.
right? Not this part of it. So
No,
it's amazing how this stuff goes around and around. It's
it's
crazy.
true.
So are we reaching our nadir here, or do you have any more you'd like to talk about? Because I want to get to my what I consider the most all-time successful commercially replacements in the history of rock and roll. But before I do that, if you got some more, go ahead and spout.
I'll just, run through these quickly. A couple more that I had that I felt were good replacements. Ronnie James Dio for Ozzy Osbourne in, coincidentally, Black Sabbath. Talking about them again. Again, I know people will be like, "Are you kidding me?" Ronnie James Dio for Ozzy. Ozzy's the king of heavy metal. Hey, look, I love Ozzy as much as the next guy. Hey, look, Ronnie James Dio has a way better voice than Ozzy has. He was a better singer. Ozzy is a mediocre singer at best. Again, I'm not putting down Ozzy as who he is. He's the king of heavy metal. But as far as stage presence and who is the better singer, I'm going to go with Ronnie James Dio. Commercially, of course, maybe not as successful, but for my own 2 cents, I'm going to go with Dio as a better replacement. And then I'll just run down a couple of quick ones. Matt Sorum for Steven Adler in Guns N' Roses as drummer. Steven Adler had a great stage presence. Matt was technically the better drummer. He joined the band after their successful Appetite for Destruction period. I still enjoy seeing Steven do his solo stuff, which he still does today. But I think Matt is, it was probably the better move to use Matt. I think Steven just had a huge drug problem at the time. And let me put it this way. If you're Guns N' Roses and you kick a member out of the band for excessive drug use, you know that drug use had to be pretty bad because those guys were pretty bad themselves. So it must have been even 10 times worse than what the rest of them were doing. The last one that I'll mention that I feel was a great replacement. And this one is going to be a little bit obscure that I'm sure a lot of people don't know of, but it was a early 90s band out of Florida called Saigon Kick. They had a big MTV hit called Love Is on the Way in the early 90s. They're one of my favorite bands. And it's another case where they didn't exactly get a new member, but the original lead singer quit. The guitarist became the frontman. The guitarist was Jason Bieler, and they put out another couple of good albums after that. I think that was maybe not commercially a success, but I think as far as artistically, I thought the best albums they ever did, speaking of this subject again, were the ones that didn't get the radio play and they weren't as successful. Jason Bieler still puts out music today. He's still out there playing, and he's just phenomenal. Great singer songwriter. So I always like to bring that up as one of those obscure ones where I'm sure a lot of people don't remember that band, but they're definitely worth checking out. Saigon Kick, Jason Bieler, who replaced Matt Kramer in that band.
Interesting. Okay, very good. This one is obvious, but it's not. You know, it's one of those. This is a cross for. I didn't know which one was more successful. I mean, Eric Stumpy Joe Childs replacing John Stumpy Peeps and Spinal Tap was my first choice, but then I thought about it again. And when you think about this, there was a band signed to a national label, worldwide, I should say. They had a cult following, but then one of the members left, and he was replaced by two people, and everything changed, and they became almost a cultural phenomenon. Bob Welch left Fleetwood Mac to be replaced by Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. I can't think of another band that came out of the blue like that. You know, they're kind of like a blues rock band, and then everything changed from their sound to their presentation to everything, and it worked like gangbusters from the very first album, which was simply called Fleetwood Mac, and off they went to the races. They became, probably for a year or two, the most popular band in America, and they sold more records than anybody. So I don't know what to say other than there's the ultimate replacement. I mean, they never looked back after that. Now they're legendary.
You certainly can't argue with that. To be fully transparent, so Fleetwood Mac was never one of my favorite bands. I was never that into them. I like a few songs here and there, but these were things that I wasn't even fully aware of as far as the replacements. But you're absolutely right. I mean, how could you argue with the success that that band had with with those replacements? I mean, it's immeasurable.
I mean, they were so successful. They put out a expensive double album called Tusk, which is by far not their best record. And they still sold 80 gazillion billion albums because they were just it for
Yeah,
that point.
yeah.
I think Stevie Nicks was a star for the minute she joined that band. Lindsey Buckingham, I'll tell you what, as guitar players go, he's very unique. His whole sound is different. And he plays some songs on some of their lesser known songs. He can play, man. He can play. He can play anything. You know, he doesn't have a hard rock sound, but his sound is totally unique. I still can't figure out what guitar he plays. He plays that little half model,
Okay.
whatever
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is. It's a small. You've seen him play that
Yeah, yeah,
small
yeah, yeah.
guitar he plays.
Yep.
I'm not technically well versed enough to know what he's playing there, but I always look at him and go, he's one of those guys. I go, how does he do that? And Go Your Own Way, a song about a breakup. That is the best guitar solo, the one that goes out, finishes the record.
Mhm.
The best expression by a guitarist matching a lyric that you will ever hear. The bitter breakup. And that guitar is angry, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff, man. I mean, I got to give him the props.
Yeah. Agreed on that. Absolutely.
Right? Doesn't that sound angry?
It does.
For a song that was a big hit like that, the whole guitar, if you listen to the end of the solo, you can hear him go, "Wow."
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
there's an angry last note that isn't even a note. He just goes, "Wow." And a song which is, and there's another song, and I wish I could remember on one of their later albums that he plays this loud solo over a minor melody. Like the melody's like dee 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 dee, but he's blasting guitar loud over the top of it. It's magical. He's very underrated as a guitar player. I think we all know his songs and his singing and all that, but I think as a guitarist, very unique. Very unique. I mean, and of course, he was the star of every edition of What Up With That on SNL. Remember those What Up With That sketches with Kenan Thompson? One of the
Oh,
guests
yes.
one of the guests every week was Lindsey Buckingham, and never got a
Okay.
chance to talk. Never talked once. He was
Right,
on it,
right,
you know,
right.
he just sit there looking pissed off. "Well, Lindsey, I'm sorry, we couldn't get to you."
Right, right, right.
And then I don't even know if you know this. They brought the real Lindsey Buckingham on. I think that was the last one they ever did. They brought the real Lindsey Buckingham to play. He was playing.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I
it
didn't
was
know
really
that.
cool. It was really
Yeah,
cool. What up with that? I love those sketches. They were so stupid.
yeah,
I'm a big SNL fan. I've been a huge fan of that. We did a show. We did a
I
show.
heard it. Yeah, absolutely. Great show.
What would we do without music, man? I mean, seriously. I mean, I got a chance to be a musician for a while in a real sense, and I don't regret 1 second of it. Music is kind of like food for your soul, man. It's like to have a band that you're fond of and to hear a replacement is coming in, you don't you grit your teeth and go, oh, is this going to be any good? And when you find out that they're good, it's like when Dominic Toretto joined the Guess Who. They were great at that point. So I'm like, what will we do without it? It's the food of life, as they say, and play on. I don't know where that quote comes from, but that's all I'll say. I love music, and it was fun looking back at some of my favorite bands. And again, I'm sure a lot of you listening out there have your own choices that we didn't even think of, probably some obvious ones. But these are the ones that Joe and I thought of, and we wanted to share them with you because you know what? It's a new year. Hopefully, there's some good new music coming our way. I hope. What do you think, Joe?
I certainly hope so. It's one of the criticisms about me is that I don't often give new music a chance, new artists a chance. That I'm constantly listening to the bands from the 70s and 80s and even somewhat the 90s, and not as much. But yeah, I still have an open mind somewhat, and I hope that we have some good new music coming out. And yeah, I agree. I mean, music is just, what would we do without it? I mean, we're just constantly. I mean, I work with music all day. You talked about Sirius XM earlier. I mean, pretty much all day as I'm working, I have Sirius on. I have about 20, 25 channels that I just kind of go back and forth, these real niche channels
Mm-hmm.
of the music that I love. And it's great. I mean, I can never go back. I can never go back to just regular terrestrial radio. I need Sirius,
No,
I need these things. I mean, I know I have some friends that ask me why I pay for it when you could have free radio. And I'm like, you don't understand. It's so different. I mean, you're so limited with regular radio. When you have Sirius, I mean, you could just find any little specific genre of music that you want, and they won't play the same stuff. As you said before, they're not going to play the same 7 songs over and over again.
well, I had a guy in the show not long ago, like Glenn Burkett, and we were talking about the programmed radio, and what made radio great in its prime. I really think that the personality's kind of been sucked out of radio in terms of just the sheer commercialism. We have to play Beyonce. We have to play this one or that one, or it's like whatever's hot, they will stick with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Radio's always been like that. But at the exclusion of virtually everything else, you'll hear the same 7 or 8 records again over and over and over again. That's what killed radio off. And this is why Sirius FM, people go, yeah, why would you pay for that? Because you're hearing what you like.
Right.
That's the thing. I love variety. We used before I moved down here. I lived near Woodstock, New York, for a while, and they had a station, an FM station, WFUV. I can't. No, that's wrong. But they had an FM station in Woodstock. I don't know if they're still like this, but doggone it, into the 1980s, deep into the 80s, you would hear Bonnie Raitt followed by you don't know what, followed by a metal song, followed by Bo Donaldson and the Haywood. It was still old school radio. It was still a mishmash of different genres, different artists. Boy, do I miss that. That's what I grew up on. I feel lucky that I grew up when I did. I'm not a fan of Hamilton, Joe, Frank, and Reynolds. But if I hadn't heard that song and kept the radio on, I never would have heard Polka or the Eagles or the others, or Dave Mason, all the stuff I really enjoyed when I was a kid. So again, I had funny taste. I didn't follow the charts. I just followed what I liked to hear. And then, when I became a blues fan in the mid 70s, it changed everything for me because I stopped listening to pop and I started listening to famous artists with my fingers in the air, like Sun Seals and Mighty Joe Young. It's like you change as you get older, but I will say this: the accessibility is a wonderful thing. And this YouTube Music is good. If you've never tried that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you get
Absolutely.
that app. It's not
Yep.
bad. You can just type in a name that they put them all on shuffle play, or Amazon is like that too, unless you buy their service. But it's still a chance to hear stuff you may not hear everywhere else. And frankly, you know what? I like it when you Pandora, former radio station on Pandora. I have Dominic Trano radio, right? Because I like Dominic Trano. They have his records on there. Then they'll play something I've never heard before, and something else I've never heard before. And then a hit from the 70s, then another Dominic Trano song, then something else you haven't heard before. That's what I like.
Yeah.
I've actually discovered new artists listening to when you form your own radio station. Spotify does it too. I think you can make a radio station
Yep.
based on
They do.
a
Yeah.
full radio station. That's cool stuff. So in a way, we're really in a golden age. We just have to work to hear the stuff we like, right, Joe?
That's true. And I mean, but I think we're lucky that we have that option now. It's, before before Sirius was an option, we were kind of limited in what we had, but now with the technology and now we're able to do it. I mean, there's more to Deep Purple than Smoke on the Water. There's more
Exactly.
to Thin Lizzy than The Boys Are Back in Town. It's like there's all these songs that you just know the one song because that's all they're playing on the radio. But if you just look a little further, you'll see that there's so much more stuff, to give a shot to. I mean, as you probably could tell from some of the bands I mentioned on this podcast, I mean, I have an affection for 80s metal, a lot of the glam stuff from the 80s. And there's a great Sirius channel called Hair Nation, which is funny. I mean, all about there. But I mean, the reason why I bring that up is that I'll stream this during the day. Why? Because they're not just going to play the one big hit from a band. They're not going to play Bon Jovi's big hit, all day. They're going to play some of the obscure stuff. They're going to play stuff that was, on their second album that was never played before. And that's what I love. I love hearing this stuff. Oh, I forgot about that song. Or maybe I never heard of this song before. That's a really cool song. And it's so accessible now. And it's fairly reasonably priced to get these things. I mean, you could haggle too with a lot of these satellite radio stations, and you get a good deal. So, I mean, yeah, if you're a music lover, as I know both you and I are, I think it's a no brainer. You have to give it a shot.
Well, I'll leave you wonderful people with this. Take my advice. And I saw a quote from a famous musician. I want to paraphrase and not mention the guy's name because if I get the quote wrong, I don't want to be wrong. But he met a fan, right? And the fan says to him, he was a big star in the 80s, we'll put it that way. The fan goes, man, there's no good music anymore. There's nothing to listen to. And the musician says, oh, really? Did you know I put an album out a year ago? And the guy goes, no. Did you know so-and-so put an album just this week? And the guy went, no. Here's my tip for you for 2025, because it's going to be quite a year this year. If you want to take the edge off life, go to a browser and type in the name of your favorite artist when you were a kid or from recent years even. Chances are they've made music that you haven't heard. Give that a try. Forget the hits. Remember the artists. Don't rely on the charts. Rely on your love of your favorite songs and your favorite musicians. So if just type in anybody that you've ever heard that you really like. I'll bet they're still making music, and I bet you haven't heard it. I think this is the year when you should hear it.
I 1000% concur. It's there. Chances are a favorite artist of yours, whether they were really ancient from the 70s or from the 90s or the 2000s, or it doesn't matter what it is. You Google them, you'll find out that they're still making music, whether or not they're getting played, and it's easily accessible, and you'll probably never realize how good the stuff still is. So I completely agree with you, Bob.
This is how I know I'm old. The year 2000 was 25 years ago.
No.
Oh,
tell me about
my
it.
Lord. Holy smokes. Well, I have to go use my sitz bath now, but in any event, this is Joe Puccio, one of my favorite people. Hey, before you go, tell them where they can find you real quick. Tell them about Generation X Wire, which is a very cool website.
Thank you so much. generationxwire.com. I like to describe it as we feature a cornucopia of subjects in the pop culture department that appeal primarily to those of us born between the mid 60s and the early 80s, but it goes beyond that as well. We spotlight everything from classic horror films like Halloween and Suspiria. We do interviews with wrestling personalities like Tito Santana, the Killer Bees. We've done interviews with actors like Dee Wallace and Dean Butler, live concert reviews and interviews from bands as diverse as, let's say, the Stones, Madonna, and Men Without Hats. So, I mean, it really kind of it's very eclectic, and we try to get a little something for everybody. A couple of things on the horizon for the website. I am going to be speaking soon. I'll have a feature on Carol Decker, who you might not know her name, but she was the lead singer of the 80s band Tapao, who had a big hit in the 80s called Heart and Soul. So I'm going to be speaking with her, doing a feature. I'm also going to be talking to a veteran writer, an Emmy Award-winning writer for 30-something named Joseph Doherty. He just came out with a book on Rod Serling. This would have been Rod Serling's. Yeah, it's really cool. Everybody loves the Twilight Zone. This would have been Serling's 100th birthday had he been alive. So in honor of that, he just came out with a book on Rod Serling. So I just finished the book, and I'm going to be speaking with him shortly. And you want to talk about something completely different than that? Getting back to wrestling, I'll be doing a feature on Bronwyn Billington, who is the daughter of Tommy Billington, the Dynamite Kid. Who she's also in the wrestling business, and we're going to talk about her dad, and obviously one of the most revolutionary wrestlers in history. So, I mean, it's a little something for everybody. It's doing really well, and I really appreciate anybody checking it out.
You're on a hot streak too. From the time I met you to now, I think the site is built up to such an extent that it is very unique, very accessible, and you're coming up with stuff you won't read anywhere else. There's no question
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
That's why I like it, because it's unique.
Thank
So
you,
that's Joe
Bob.
Puccio. It's generationxwire.com. Where your Facebook or anything? People could say hi.
Same thing. You can go to, at Generation X Wire on the social media channels. Admittedly, that's something that it's a goal for me in 2025 is to try to get try to get a little bit more active with the social media channels. It's definitely one of the points that is a little lagging for me, but I'm gonna try to beef that up a little bit as well in the new year.
There you go. Folks, it's the rock and roll replacements. Hats off to all of them for making our lives better. And Joe Puccio, thanks again, my friend.
Thank you, Bob.
We hope you enjoyed that one. We really enjoyed putting that one together. As you may or may not know, I am Bob Smith, and I am the former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, a bunch of different national magazines I work for. And I've had a long experience in, media. My two shows are the Outdated Entertainment Hour and the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We hope you avail yourselves of those. Now, outdated means classic. We're talking old-timey stuff, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you name it. In any event, we do hope that you listen. Come to think of it, the year 2000 is 25 years ago. Write to us, outdatedent, E-N-T, at Gmail. That's outdatedent at Gmail. Find us on Facebook. My name is Bob Smith. I'm the only one singing with B.B. King, and you can find Outdated Bob at Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram. Our website is outdatedentertainment.buzzsprout.com. Hop on board. All of our shows are there. Just hit a button, and it's there. If you want to find out where to listen to the Outdated Entertainment Hour, it's easy. Go to any browser on your phone or computer. Type in Outdated Entertainment Bob Smith, bang. It will all come up for you. Can you make your choice to where you want to listen? And if you do want to listen all the time, please subscribe. We would really appreciate your help. But that's it for now. We had a lot of fun putting this one together. I'm going to go put on some actual vinyl. So until next time in a couple of weeks, my name is Bob Smith. We hope you had fun with this. We certainly did. And Ringo Starr has a new album out. It's a country record. You know what he likes to say? Peace and love, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.